First, I want to bring Mark Almond into the conversation. Now, Mark regularly helps us with matters such as these, historian, director of the Crisis Research Institute in Oxford, and appears regularly in the Daily Mail. And if I can, before we look forward, Mark, I want to take you back in time. I read your piece yesterday on the way home. Headline, "The lesson from history to everyone hoping to topple the mullahs. Be careful what you wish for." Expand a little, if you would, Mark. Morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Well, I think a lot of people will no doubt wish the Ayatollahs could disappear in a puff of smoke. But I think the lesson of history of Iran, for instance, in 1979 was that a lot of people thought the fall of the Shah would lead to a happy future and a democratic future and a tolerant one. Well, it didn't. And the great problem with revolutions, particularly revolutions brought about in the middle of war, think about Russia in 1917, is that people we don't know of, in all the chaos and all the destruction, come out on top. And they're very often much more radical and much less friendly to the proponents of the revolution abroad, the friends of the country abroad, than those people were naively thinking was going to happen. And so I think we have to be careful that a war for regime change in a big country like Iran doesn't produce a more dangerous and unpredictable regime than we've had for the last 45 years.
Let's come back to the UK. What level of support, Mark, should be offered from the Prime Minister?
Well, I think this is a great problem. It depends what President Trump wants to do. If Trump wants just to have a surgical strike on the key nuclear installations, it seems to me it's sensible for the British to remain out of it, because all we're going to get from, as it were, actively supporting it without actually playing any significant role is Iranians will blame Britain as well. We will be the little Satan to the great Satan. If there's going to be a big war, maybe we have to decide whose side to take. But just, I think, wanting to trail our coat behind the Americans in this particular case be foolish. Harold Wilson wisely kept out of Vietnam. Maybe Keir Starmer could be more like Harold Wilson than Tony Blair, for instance.
Were he to do that, knowing that there's pressure from Washington or some quarters in Washington on the whole constitution of NATO, what might that do to that relationship, Mark?
Well, that is the great problem. That's, by the way, the Iranians have certain cards to play. As Trump, to be fair, was saying, war is very unpredictable. And if you get a bogged down situation, which may not look likely now but could happen, then Trump may look, say, to the German Chancellor, who is much more gung-ho for American-led intervention, albeit without the Germans taking part, than, for instance, the French or the British. So, yes, NATO could come under pressure. Mr. Putin is sitting in Moscow offering his good offices and also bombing away Kiev and Ukraine at the same time.
Diego Garcia, as you'll be aware, Mark, is mainly used by the US, but it's ultimately a British base, which means the British government would have to authorise. I don't know where bunker busters are flown from. I don't know if they're Diego Garcia. I don't know where they go from. But should we authorise that, Mark?
Well, that would be something, that would be a severe break with the Americans if they want to use Diego Garcia, which is a very likely base for their B-2 bunker buster carrying bombers, or they might fly over Cyprus. And so, yeah, I think a British government that refused Diego Garcia's use would, of course, then raise the whole question of what is the government doing about the deal to send it, to give it over to Mauritius. So, yeah, there's a huge series of crises for Britain here, but also, as you say, for NATO and ultimately for our security. This war looked as though it was going to be a magical, dazzling victory for the Israelis within a few days. Maybe, ironically, the American intervention will drag it out rather than bring it to a conclusion. OK, lastly, Mr.
Almond, we are in the middle of Royal Ascot Week, so were you to put your money on whether Trump does go in, goes in for a surgical strike, goes in for a prolonged conflict, where's your fiver going? Mark?
I go for a surgical strike, I'm afraid, and that may turn out to be the least decisive of the options.
Always enjoy your work in the Mail. Thanks, Mark. Mark Almond, historian, director of the Crisis Research, I said that twice now, Institute in Oxford, and a columnist with the Daily Mail, 12 after 7. Sir Mark Lyall Grant served as the UK ambassador to the United Nations and also National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister. That was back in 2017 and joins me now. Sir Mark, thank you for coming on. Were your counsels to be sought by this Prime Minister concerning Diego Garcia, what might your advice be? Good morning, Sir Mark.
Good morning, Nick. Well, I think it puts the British government in quite a difficult position, and I'm sure the Prime Minister is perhaps hoping that the Americans will not ask to use Diego Garcia. At the moment, there's no sign that they will. There were two bombers, the stealth bombers that your previous Mark was talking about, because they are the only aircraft capable of delivering the MOP, this massive ordnance penetrator, if they want to attack the Fordow underground nuclear facility. But they have other options. They don't need to use Diego Garcia. There were these B-2s in Diego Garcia in April, but they're no longer there, as far as we know. So they would have to put them back into Diego Garcia and then use that as a base to attack. Now, if President Trump did ring up the Prime Minister and say, I want to use Diego Garcia, then I think the Prime Minister is going to have to decide what the potential fallout is for UK interests in the region, because clearly that would be a signal that we were part of this conflict or supporting this conflict, and in Iranian terms, we would become a legitimate target. And we shouldn't forget that Britain still has an embassy in Tehran, which the Americans don't have.
You're no stranger to the corridors of power. What do you imagine? I know we're dealing with someone that's very difficult to try and determine which way he might jump, but what might determine which way President Trump decides to proceed here, Sir Mark?
Well, of course, unpredictability is one of his key characteristics, and we've seen that in the first 5 months of his administration. I think what he's trying to do is maximise the threat, hoping that Iran will step back from the brink, will negotiate, will surrender, if you like, in his terms. And there are some indications that the Iranian authorities, recognising that their very existence is now threatened, would like to have some dialogue. And I'm sure President Trump would much prefer to avoid any direct US military action, because many in his own movement, in the MAGA movement, don't support any American involvement in this conflict when Iran is not directly threatening the United States. So I'm sure he's hoping not to have to make that decision. But of course, the longer this goes on, the pressure he gets from Netanyahu. We've seen more civilians sort of targeted in Israel. A lot of people around him will be pressing him to go ahead.
Lastly, I've taken a fiver off Mark. He sees a bunker buster kind of bomb. That's Mark 1. You're Sir Mark 2. Where's your fiver going, Sir Mark?
Well, I would also think that there's a high risk now of some sort of surgical strike on Fordow. I agree with that. But I don't think by any means it's a certainty, because, as I say, President Trump absolutely does not want to take that step, because it has consequences of which we don't know really where it'll end. Right.
What should the British decision be regarding Diego Garcia, regarding possible further involvement? Stewart in Edgware, what should it be?
I think the Americans and the British, the French, should finish off that regime in Iran. That is one evil regime. I talked to a lot of Iranian people. I helped an Iranian kid stay in the country. I took him to the immigration office. 16 years old, walking down the street with his girlfriend, arrested by the religious police. They tied that kid up and whipped him 10 times for holding her hand and killed her. This is the regime you're talking about. They killed kids from 13 years old.
I remember them chasing their own students and shooting university students. I remember it vividly.
Over 1,000, you're right, Rick. Over 1,000. They machine gunned over 1,000.
So we're on the same page, Stuart, but what do we replace it?
Well, I think the Iranian people are very good people. It's not like Iraq. I think a much better regime.
Iraqi people are all right. I'm sure it's normally the regimes that are the problem.
It's the regime, but I think...
So I think a lot of people would agree. I don't feel particularly comfortable going to bed at night thinking that Iran is inching closer to nuclear capability. I don't feel safer for my children, for my family.
Exactly.
What are we going to replace it with, Stuart? That's the key, sir.
Well, we help the Iranian people have free elections and they get rid of that monstrous regime. I think they're open to talk.
That's what we said about Iraq. That's the problem. I mean, I hate to be a whataboutie, but that's the problem. We must tread carefully with all that. Stuart, thank you. 7:23. William in Harrow. William, what should the level of British support be? Morning.
I think we should hold our hand. But anyway, I think it's academic. Mr. Starmer will follow Mr. Trump to the end of the earth. So we've seen him pulling out a letter from the King.
Should he do that, sir?
No, I don't think so.
Why?
It's never wise to start throwing bombs. Have they asked the and I'm not a fan of the regime in Iran. I've heard the last caller and I don't disagree with him. But there's going to be a lot of innocent Iranian people slaughtered, and there's no guarantee. When you start throwing your bombs around,
no, there's not.
Look at Mr. Blair. How many Iraqi people died that we don't know anything about?
So just to clarify, we do not offer support.
Well, we don't offer physical support with bombs and army boots on the ground or anything like that.
But do we allow the use of... it seems ridiculous things we've given it to Mauritius, but do we allow Diego Garcia? It's a tough one, isn't it? That's the reality. Al in Ealing, what should that support look like to you? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. I don't think we should get involved in this war at all, primarily because of several risks that are associated with getting involved. The first one is dropping a bomb on a nuclear facility is bound to cause radiation leaks. And the radiation is not just confined to Iran. It's going to spread depending upon the wind direction.
Well, I would imagine they have worked. I don't think it will be fully developed. I doubt we're blowing up actually a nuclear missile. I think we're blowing up what provides the requirements and the provision, I think, in reality. But I hear what you say, so that's one reason for caution. Any others?
Yeah, the IEA has announced that there is 600 kilograms of enriched uranium/plutonium in Iran. We have no idea where that is. Dropping a 4,000-pound bomb on all this nuclear enriched material is going to cause issues. The second risk is that I'm a taxpayer and I don't want my money spent abroad on planes and jets flying all over to Cyprus to support this war. This war is asymmetric. It is not an equal war with all these nations joining against Iran. Why? Why are we bombing other countries?
Well, let me ask you this. How comfortable are you with Iran having nuclear capability, Al?
Yeah, Nick, listen.
No, could I ask you to answer that question, sir?
Yes. So throughout history, Iran has never attacked a Western nation. There might be the odd incident.
No, hang on. Sure, it's proxies it has.
Well,
such as Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other terror organisations. So, can I come back to that question? How comfortable would you be with having nuclear weapons?
I'm completely comfortable with it because the authority has investigated their facilities, and they have said that they are nowhere near producing a nuclear bomb, and this is going to be turned out to Iraq 202.
Iraq 2.0 or 2.0 is what you're saying. Okay, Al, thank you. Julia's in Edgware. What should it be, Julia? Good morning.
Hello, hi, good morning. Definitely they need to support. The difference, you keep comparing Iran and Iraq. It's completely different.
With respect, I don't know that either. Callers do, I think, is fairer to say. But yes,
well, I'm Iraqi myself, so I'm telling you from knowledge. Iraq was handed to Iran when they toppled Saddam. It was handed to the mullahs.
By whom?
And that's the reason what you see in Iraq now.
By whom?
By the Americans and by the Allies, because they did not understand the complication of the Sunnis and Shiites.
The desire for democratic elections, what happened to that ambition, Julia?
Well, it was a shamble, because in the beginning it was successful, and then it was ruled by Shiite parties.
You don't see that level of division in Iran?
Definitely not.
Tell me the background in Iran that's... You're closer to it than I am. You have far greater knowledge. What is the difference in this area from Iran to Iraq, then, would you say, Julia?
Well, first of all, there is a figure that the Iranian, a lot of Iranians, I can't give you numbers, it's the Shah's son. There is a figure. In Iraq, there wasn't.
I see.
That's the difference. Okay. And secondly, as I said, because of the Shiites were persecuted by Saddam and, since the beginning of the establishment of Iraq, they were sided by Iran. And that's the reason Iran literally controls Iraq. Once the mullahs' control is not in Iraq, believe me, Iraq will start breathing.
Can I ask you a final question? And it's a privilege to speak to someone who is Iraqi. I don't manage to do that every day of my life. How is the country now, all these years on? When you speak to family or friends, what do they say?
Oh, in Iraq?
Sorry, Iraq, yes.
Yeah, it's terrible because they can't speak, they can't breathe, they can't do anything. And even in 2019, when there was some demonstrations for months and months, it was about 700 people were killed nobody spoke about it in the international media.
So there's almost like a news blackout on it. Julia, do stay in touch. Laura's in Camberley. Laura, what do you want to tell me? Good morning.
Hi. I just don't believe that Iran really has serious intentions of getting a nuclear bomb. If they wanted to, they absolutely could have already. What we blew up was, well, I say we because, let's all be honest, we're going to back this whether the public wants the government to or not.
What makes you say that?
Because I don't trust that they listen to the public. I mean, the public have been wildly at odds with the unconditional support for Israel, since their bombardment of Gaza started, and it's done nothing. I can't imagine that public expression that we don't want to go to war is going to do anything either. But to the point of the claimed reasons we are going to war, what America blew up, or Israel rather, was what it's capable of doing civilian energy infrastructure, nuclear power. Right? If they wanted a nuclear bomb...
You don't buy what the IAEA is saying?
I don't, and even if they are developing a nuclear bomb, does it really matter?
How would you know more than those acknowledged experts?
I just think if North Korea can build a bomb sooner than... If Iran's really trying to build a bomb, they would have done it faster than North Korea, which is entirely cut off from the rest of the world. And also, in terms of am I comfortable with them having a nuclear bomb? Well, I don't think they're going to use it to nuke anyone unprovoked. I think because they are reasonable people, whatever.
Well, are they reasonable people?
I think that a lot of what
these are, in some instances, people, or they have sponsored regimes of terrorists who will happily fly aircraft into buildings in the mistaken belief that they're going to be visited by Allah at the end of it all. I don't know they have the same value on life that perhaps you and I have, Laura.
I think our government have done terrible things, but at the same time, I don't. But what I'm saying, and this is my point, I still don't think that our government would unprompted nuke somebody. As terrible as some of the things I've.
No.
Yeah,
I thought you said the Iranian government wouldn't use it. Of course, I don't think you can legislate for
I'm
them.
saying neither will, but really, what the reason? Because they are human beings interested in.
But if they're human beings, why would they willingly fly themselves and hundreds of innocent people into buildings?
Okay,
It is difficult, isn't it?